Greetings, I'm Bill Everett, and welcome to this episode of Chamber Conversations, Mozart's Chamber Music with Winds. While the string quartet, and to a certain extent the piano trio, may be the most popular chamber music ensembles of the latter part of the 18th century, they are by no means the only ones. Then, as now, composers are drawn to what may be termed non-standard ensembles. These could include various combinations of string, wind, and keyboard instruments. Perhaps composers are wanting to write for a specific person, maybe even themselves, or they may have received a commission. Someone will pay them to write a piece of music. These are all reasons behind the chamber music that features wind instruments in combination with either strings or piano by Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. In this episode, we'll explore several of Mozart's chamber music works that feature wind instruments. We'll hear how Mozart manipulates the timbral possibilities among a specific group of instruments to create a myriad of effects. We'll look at how Mozart sometimes creates concerto-like passages where the wind instrument is a soloist accompanied by the strings, and at other times he melds the instruments together in a way in which every player is vital and of equal importance. Finally, we'll see how Mozart experiments with musical form, that is, how a piece is structured to unfold over time, and how he thwarts convention to create some astonishing musical moments. In 1777, Mozart resigned his position at the Salzburg court of the Archbishop Colloredo and left the city, accompanied by his mother, to find either a new post or a permanent patron. One of their stops was in the city of Mannheim. The Prince Elector Palatine, Karl Theodor, whose court was at Mannheim, was a dedicated patron of the arts and sponsored one of the finest orchestras in Europe. He paid very well. Karl Theodor hired some of the best musicians of the day to play in his orchestra, including a very young oboist named Friedrich Lamm. Mozart hoped to secure a post with the famed ensemble, but Karl Theodor had recently become Elector and Duke of Bavaria and was planning to move his court to Munich. Hence, no position was available. Although Mozart did not secure long-time employment in Mannheim, he did get some commissions. One came from a person whom Mozart referred to as Monsieur de Jong. There's debate about exactly who this person was, but for sure, he was a very talented amateur flutist with disposable income. De Jong offered Mozart 200 gulden for what he called 3 short simple concertos and a couple of quartets for the flute. Instead of the 3 short concertos and 2 quartets, Mozart gave him 1 original concerto, a reworking of his previously written oboe concerto, now for flute, a quartet for flute and strings with 3 movements, and another with 2 movements. Since Mozart didn't fill the complete order, de Jong, as the story goes, gave him only 96 gulden. Not incidentally, neither concerto could accurately be called short and simple. Mozart completed the first of the 2 quartets for flute and strings, Kochel 285, on Christmas Day, 1777. He treats the flute in a concertante manner, that is, more as a solo instrument than as an equal member of a democratic ensemble. This makes the quartet a sort of small-scale concerto. Furthermore, the quartet is in 3 movements, fast, slow, fast, like a concerto. But rather than having a full orchestra to support the soloist, here it is the 3 string players. It makes sense that the person who commissioned the work, a flutist, would get plenty of chances to take the musical spotlight. After all, he paid Mozart to write a piece for he himself to play. To hear one brief example of this soloistic aspect, here's the opening of the middle movement, marked Adagio, where the flute's exquisite melody is supported by pizzicato strings. That is, they are plucked rather than bowed. Whereas the flute quartets were written for a talented amateur, the so-called Oboe Quartet, Koszul 360 for oboe, violin, viola, and cello, was written with one of the finest oboists of the time in mind. When Mozart visited the court of the same Karl Theodor, who he met in Mannheim, who was now Elector and Duke in Munich in 1781, he became reacquainted with the court orchestra's principal oboist. This was the aforementioned Friedrich Ramm, whom Mozart had met in Mannheim 4 years earlier. Like the flute quartets, the Oboe Quartet is a concertante work and features many soloistic passages for the oboe. Ramm was known for his highly expressive playing and formidable technical virtuosity. His contemporaries noted the exceptionally wide range of musical moods that his playing evoked. Ramm also advocated and promoted the latest advances in instrument technology, including the ability for the oboe's range to be extended increasingly higher. When writing the quartet, Mozart certainly had Ramm and the distinctive capabilities of his instrument in mind. At several points in the quartet, the oboe must play a high F above the treble clef. This was a note that most oboes at the time could not play, so an audience has heard Ramm utter it softly and with an extraordinary amount of control. They must have been in awe. In a moment, we'll be watching a performance of the third movement of the Oboe Quartet, a rondo. A rondo is a form that features a recurring theme separated by contrasting episodes. Rondos come in several varieties. Perhaps we can think of them in terms of sandwiches. The most common rondo designs are ABA, CA, where A indicates the rondo theme or slices of bread, while B is a tomato and C a slice of cheese. The A theme, as seen here, holds everything together. Another version is ABA, CA, B prime A, where the B material returns, but not exactly the same, as the visual difference in the two tomato slices makes evident. In music, the return of B would usually be in a different key, hence the prime. First time here, second time here. It could also be a version of B that shares many aspects with the original. It is a tomato after all, but with some differences, like the color. Another statement of A then follows to wrap up the movement. Sometimes that middle section might be more complex and multi-layered. In many instances, it would be based on the main rondo theme, the bread theme, which is torn into crumbs, and Mozart plays with its recognizable content, like he does in the development section in a sonata form movement. But this is Mozart, so one thing we can expect is the unexpected. In this particular rondo, everything is going to plan with the second version of the form until we approach the end of the B prime section. Just as we are preparing ourselves for that final return of the now familiar theme, something for which we've prepared ourselves, since we know how such rondos operate, Mozart surprises us by not bringing back that main theme, but rather offering a series of whispers that leads to a somewhat whimsical final gesture that includes one of those famous high Fs that Ramm's oboe could play. It isn't just through the formal design that Mozart provides surprises in this most delightful movement. In that central section of the form, the one indicated with a slice of cheese, Mozart does something truly remarkable. While the strings go merrily along in their lilting compound meter, where each pulse is divided into three parts, ya-ta-ta-ti-ta-ta-ti-ta-ta-ti-ta-ta, bum, 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 the oboe takes off in quadruple meter, where beats are both organized and divided into groups of 4. This emphasis on 4 in the oboe part is superimposed on the strings' underlying emphasis on 3. Hence, what happens is that during this passage, doing the math, the oboist must play 16 notes, equally distributed over the time it takes for the strings to play 12 notes. This results in what is called polymeter, where more than one linear organization of time occurs simultaneously. It truly is an extraordinary effect and requires a special level of virtuosity from the soloist. Without further ado, here's the final movement, the third movement of the Oboe Quartet, performed by Frisson. Two other works for winds and strings reflect Mozart's fascination with mid-range timbres rather than the higher registers of the flute and the oboe, as in the works we've been discussing. Both of these are quintets rather than quartets, and having that fifth part is something that in and of itself adds to the richness of the sound. First is the horn quintet, Koschel 407. This was written for Josef Leutgeb, a very talented horn player. Mozart knew Leutgeb when they were both living in Salzburg, and Leutgeb played horn in the Archbishop Colloredo's orchestra. Leutgeb moved to Vienna in the early 1780s, around the same time Mozart settled there. But being a freelance horn player in Vienna, he was always in need of extra money. So he ran his wife's family's cheese shop. And it was for Leutgeb that Mozart wrote his horn quintet in 1782. As a quintet for horn and strings, one might expect this work to be scored for horn and the traditional string quartet of two violins, viola, and cello. But this is Mozart, whose innovation and creativity are part of what makes Mozart, Mozart. The quintet is actually scored for horn, one violin, two violas, and cello. Why two violas and not two violins? We'll never know for sure, but there are some possibilities. First, with a heavy emphasis on higher ranges the two violins would bring, think back to the flute and oboe quartets, it would be acoustically difficult for the horn with its mid-range timbre to cut through the overall sound mass. So, by eliminating some of those higher frequencies, the resulting sonic palette makes it easier to hear the horn. Second, Mozart may have written two viola parts simply because he liked the viola, being a violist himself. Third, the combination of horn and two violas provides a highly distinctive tone color of velvety richness. These are the sonorities that may be heard as prefiguring the lusciousness of Brahms in the latter part of the 19th century. Here's a bit of the third and final movement to hear Mozart's highly distinctive sound world. The other quintet to feature a mid-range wind instrument and strings is one of Mozart's final works, the Quintet for Clarinet and Strings, or Clarinet Quintet, Koschel 581 from 1789. Mozart wrote it for Anton Stadler, one of the most important clarinetists of the time. Stadler, like Mozart, was drawn to the middle and lower registers of the sonic spectrum. Here, as opposed to what he did in the horn quintet, Mozart writes for the standard string quartet. Mozart's clarinet quintet is a large-scale work in 4 movements, emulating the emerging majestic genres of the symphony and the string quartet. By evoking these genres, Mozart is perhaps suggesting that chamber music featuring winds should be taken every bit as seriously as these other genres. The clarinet quintet's grand dimensions include concertante-like passages that prominently feature the clarinet, as well as others in which the clarinet is one among equals with the members of the string quartet. To get a hint of the splendor of this work, let's listen to a bit of the sublime second movement. To conclude this episode, we'll explore Mozart's Quintet for piano and winds, Koschel 452. Mozart dated the manuscript March 30th, 1784, and it received its first performance 2 days later, on April 1st, at the Burgtheater in Vienna. The quintet was part of a concert program that was not unusual at the time. It was meant to showcase a particular musician, in this case Mozart, as both a composer and a performer. These were musically diverse affairs, and by today's standards, very long. This particular concert featured 3 symphonies, probably number 35, the Hofner, number 36, the Linz, and the first Viennese performance of number 31, the Paris Symphony. Mozart himself appeared as soloist in his Piano Concerto number 16, Koschel 451. Then he demonstrated his abilities as a solo performer through a set of improvisations, and after that, he displayed his talents as a chamber musician in his quintet for piano and winds. Mozart likely wrote the work with its distinctive scoring to attract the attention of Prince Alois Liechtenstein, the 3rd son of the Emperor Franz Josef. Liechtenstein was planning to establish his own harmony ensemble. Harmony ensembles were wind bands that included pairs of oboes, clarinets, horns, and bassoons, extremely popular in the 18th century. It would have been very useful for Mozart to be connected to this new ensemble, especially with the prince as a patron. The prince was planning to attend the quintet's premiere at the Burgtheater, to Mozart's great delight. However, he ended up hosting his own musical event at his palace, which meant he could not attend Mozart's concert. The prince eventually did form a harmony ensemble nearly 8 years later, in early 1792. By that time, though, Mozart was no longer alive. For his quintet, rather than having pairs of the harmony instruments, Mozart wrote for single ones: oboe, clarinet, horn, bassoon. As he did elsewhere, Mozart here melds the soloistic features of a concerto with the shared roles that define chamber music. The quintet is in the typical 3 movements associated with most of Mozart's chamber music featuring winds, which also follows the standard concerto design. The clarinet quintet, with its 4 movements, remember, is an exception. The final movement of the piano quintet is again a rondo, but of a different type than the one that concludes the Oboe Quartet. Here, we have a fundamental ABACA, or bread, tomato, bread, cheese, bread design. But since this is Mozart, we can be sure that something unexpected will happen, and it does. Toward the end of the second episode, cheese, a bit of the first episode, tomato, returns, which then is transformed as we start to anticipate the return of the A theme, a slice of bread that holds the entire rondo together. Here, Mozart offers one of his best surprises yet in any of his chamber music. He sets up the introductory formula for a cadenza, and thus jettisons us directly into the world of the concerto. In concertos of the period, these passages, which are prefaced by a series of chords which would act like a spotlight on what is going to happen next, would be improvised by the single soloist on the spot, and generally would include references to musical themes heard earlier in the movement. But to create this effect in a piece of chamber music, and with 5 instruments, this sort of group improvisation could certainly lead to pandemonium, though, as jazz musicians have taught us, it does not have to. To ensure that the players would remain a collective during the cadenza, Mozart wrote out the passage to feature not 1, not 2, not even 3 or 4, but all 5 of the performers. It is meant to show off the virtuosity of the individual performers, as well as their abilities to manipulate shared musical material. More so, it is meant to sound improvised, as if one player, the oboist, comes up with an idea and invites the other members of the ensemble to join in, building upon it. After this tour de force display, Mozart does indeed bring back the main recurring theme, followed by a satisfying coda to let us know that the piece truly is coming to a close. Here to play the 3rd movement of Mozart's piano quintet are members of the Plaza Winds, the University of Missouri-Kansas City Conservatory's Graduate Fellowship Wind Quintet, with Dr. Jessica Koebbe, piano. In this episode, we've explored Mozart's chamber music featuring winds. We've witnessed Mozart's ability to create distinctive timbres within and among each combination of instruments. The rondos that conclude the Oboe Quartet and the piano quartet are also playgrounds for formal design. Mozart, well aware that his audience is expecting one thing, delivers another. In doing so, he elicits not just a bit of surprise, but also an enormous amount of delight. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Chamber Conversations, coming to you from the Friends of Chamber Music. Until next time.